liberty, and justice for all.
Thank you to everyone for coming tonight. I do apologize for my tardiness. It was obviously unplanned due to traffic. The 75 congestion. Hopefully that's as bad as it gets, 10 minutes behind schedule, but I do apologize.
It'll be fixed in November.
Danielle, if we could start with our call to order and the roll call.
Jeff Benzine,
Here.
Neil Lautman,
Here.
David Newbill,
Here.
Lynn Shank, not here, Jim Christopher,
Here.
Jenny McKay, Angela Willis.
All right, my fellow commissioners, if everyone had an opportunity to review today's agenda, I would at this time, unless there's comments or revisions, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Just one detail, the start time was 4:30, not 7, just for the record. On the agenda, it's the start.
Yeah, I changed it
Just so
already.
we have it
Yeah,
correct.
yep, I changed it already.
Could we make that 4:42?
Sure, I did, at 4:42 is when we started.
Any other changes? Motion to approve. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? There being none, today's agenda is approved. No minutes from the prior meeting, this being a special meeting. We'll move right to really the item of old business for this evening's discussion. That would be the battery storage draft ordinance update. A lot of materials to go through. Just for the sake of transparency, your commission is doing what it can to educate, along with many of you, I'm sure. We take our responsibility to the community very seriously. These are not easy decisions, especially against the landscape of emerging science in a rural community. So we appreciate the challenge in front of us. Our endeavor is to be prepared and to make the right decision for our entire community. Okay. So that being said, if anyone has a suggestion as to how to go about this, is Liz Gunden here?
No, this was so last minute, she just literally gave this to me today.
Okay. And Will?
No, he's chairing another meeting for BZA at this community tonight, but if you like, Mr. Chairman, I think I can tee this up for everybody.
I would appreciate that, Bob. Thank you.
Today's meeting is to look at some preliminary draft of what we think would be doable. There's no commitments in this yet, so we need to understand that, but we've had a significant number of conversations, not only between several of us, but as well with Vesper, and I've been calling the people at the state of Michigan that actually write these ordinances. I'd just like to state again for anybody that doesn't know, I'm sure I'm correct in this statement. The entire township board, and I'm sure that entire planning commission, wishes we weren't doing this. We did not go looking for this. This is a case which happens frequently in the township where somebody wants to do something and they call us up and say, I'm getting a piece of property, I'd like to talk to you about what we're gonna do. And that's how this got started. And so I, like all the rest of them, have been trying to bring us up to speed on what is actually applying in this law. And if you recall from the first meeting, our state rep, Dave Martin, he's on our side, okay? He's a good guy. He said that this got passed last October by Governor Whitmer and the Democrats right along party lines. So they knew exactly what they were doing. Just if you're not aware of it, this is just another step in a series of things that have been taking place over the last several years where the state is trying to usurp from the local townships the ability to do their own reviews and justifications. This is just the latest of them. And frankly, it kind of looks like the formula that seems to work for them is let's pass it, make it effective a year from now, and then it's already kind of done, which is what happened here. This got passed in October of last year. It is effective November 29th of this year. And if you're wondering why we're doing this, it's because if you recall when Madeline Kroll, the lady from Michigan State University that was hired by Eagle, and If you don't know what EGLE is, that's just the new name for what used to be the DNR. Madeline said that she was hired to write the ordinance for it, so she's the basic construct for it. And she has been extremely helpful in my conversation. She's gone right now, she couldn't be here today, but she gets back the 23rd, and I'm gonna talk to her again about some other issues that got discussed earlier today with me and a resident and some other people here on the board. Madeline is the one who wrote the original first draft for the ordinance that they're looking at. And why I feel confident trusting her is when she went through that with me, she indicated a couple areas, this is what the ordinance says, but Bob, I don't agree with it. So just to let you know, the stuff that they put in there is not necessarily verbatim what the person they hired to do put it in. So on those, what I have done is tried to negotiate in good faith with Vesper that if this ends up going in, how can we impact the results of the requirements to make it as to make it as palatable as possible, because I can tell you that literally everybody I've talked to in the state says these go in. And that's really, if you look at how the ordinance was written. But there are some good questions that have come up, and I've tried to incorporate some of those in the discussions I have here with Vesper. So if you got this piece of paper, I'm just being honest with you, I cannot swear to all of these things that are listed on the Vesper Groveland side, but I can tell you that to this point in time, the discussions with the people at Vesper, and Danielle and I had one at about, what was it, about 3:30 today, I think, that have been pretty positive, and we've sent them the latest revision, which the Planning Commission has, of pretty much what we think the ordinance is gonna look like. And I think they're going to agree to these, so I'll tell you what they are and why I picked these to do it. If you look at them, the first one on there, one of the key issues is the setback from the units themselves to the first non-participant building wall, which would be basically a house or a building that isn't part of this project. And the original law, the way it stands now from the state of Michigan, only requires it to be 300 feet. I personally think that's not a safe enough distance. I had talked to Vesper early on and said, you got a big piece of property. Can't we move this somehow so it's farther away from everybody's house? They did a modification, and the last drawing that I saw, I don't have a final site plan from them yet, they haven't submitted. But the last drawing I saw, they moved it so that the closest house was about 650 feet, and I think the other ones were roughly 1,200 or 1,250 feet away, instead of the 300 feet that the state has got in their ordinance. The other items they have is the state's requirement is that the road has to be, must be at least 50 feet away from the road. We made it 100. And this is the big issue where I think Madeline Kroll, the lady from MSU, has been particularly helpful. She said the state law is written with the dB noise level, that's the decibels, noise level being 55 dB at that wall that's closest. And I'm going to tell you frankly, Madeline Kroll said, I don't think that's right, Bob. They should have made it 45. And I don't know if you know how decibels work, but maybe you probably do.
It's a square function.
Yeah, and I think roughly 3 dB is about half. So going from 55 to 45 is a pretty significant drop in the noise level. To give you a rough proximity, my barn at my property where I live, on my 7 acres, is about 600 feet from the back of my house. So if I were standing on my patio and the barn door was open and somebody was over talking in my barn, I doubt I could hear it at my house. And it's a pretty clear shot from my house all the way to the barn. There's one tree in there. I think this 45 is much better, and I think they will agree to this, okay? Which is a big difference. The other things that we did were, on the well, I heard some of you saying, what if something does happen and there's a thermal runaway unit? What do we do because all of the wood's around it? And they kind of clear about a 12 or 13 acre spot, but there's still a lot of woods, and if that, in worst case scenario, they can burn for a while. So I said, well, they have to provide a well to the site anyway, because the units are, if you recall, they're roughly the size of a shipping container, and they have heating and air conditioning units in them. And the noise they're talking about from these is not like you might have heard about at some solar installations. It's not the hum. What you're getting is the blowers and fans that are running for the heating and air conditioning units. And I did some research on the weekend myself. Frankly, I Googled it. And there you'll see some will say that noise might be between 70, 80 dB, but most of them say it's usually around 70, maybe 75 dB. And that's if you're standing right at the boxes that the fans are in. And so these dB levels are measured at different places. And I know, Neil, you and I, when we had the discussion Friday, and Jeff, you asked, could they do that to the property line? And I said, honestly, I don't know. My gut feeling is that this property is so heavily wooded, they may be able to. So at about 3:30 this afternoon, when I finally got a hold of the Vesper people again, I said, I would like you to let me know if you think you can meet 45 dB at the property line rather than the wall of the first non-participant building. So I don't have an answer on that yet, but we're trying to see if we could do it. And if I had to guess, I think we might be able to, because this 62 acres is all wooded right now. You're gonna get a lot of noise suppression because, like I said, at my house, I don't think you could hear 55 dB from my barn to my house, and I got one tree in between it, okay? This has got a whole woods around it, and the other thing I requested, if you see a little farther down, is I told them I wanted to use the sound suppression mats that I've seen on some of these systems, where they basically blanket the outer screen with it to help suppress the noise. I honestly think, I don't know, but I think we are on the verge of maybe having a very good solution that will suppress the noise where I don't think it would be bothering anybody. So those are some of the changes. The other one is, as I said, when people were worried about a possible water or fire on a runaway thermal unit, they're required to put a well in there. So one of the things they have to get automatically is a clean air permit for the exhaust fans on the units. They have to have a clean water permit, and they have to have a soil erosion permit, which every construction project in the county has to have. And that's when you see them put the plastic up around on the little stakes so that the dirt doesn't run too far away. They have to get all of those, but I told them I don't want to use a regular well there. That's practically worthless to us. I said, in the event of a large fire event, I have to shuttle water, because the way our fire department works, there's no real community-wide hydrant system, as you're all aware. What we have in our township is the same kind of thing that's on the front lawn here. There's one over by my house, there's one at the station on Dixie, there's one behind the Mavis building, there's about 7 of them around the township. They are basically large 10-inch casing agricultural wells that they punch into the ground, and they put a 3-phase motor on them, and those wells have to pump somewhere between 350 and ideally, if we get a really good pocket, 500 gallons a minute. So what would normally happen in a fire situation is they would have to come with a fire truck and a tanker, a pumper and a tanker, to the site if they had a fire. Our fire department takes those tankers and they drop them into what they call a remote portable tank, okay? It's just, for lack of a better phrase, it looks like a big kid's pool, okay? And then the pumper trucks pump out of that hose, out of that tank. It takes 7 minutes on a big well like this to fill up that tanker truck, okay? And it takes 3 minutes for that tanker truck to open the chute up and dump it into a portable tank. But you can imagine if you had a lengthy fire, we would have to have a series of trucks responding, going in and out. And I said, that's just unrealistic, I think, for any length of time. So what I want is a 10-inch casing with a well that pumps 350 to 500. They can set it up, and then if they need to keep water on the surrounding area to keep it from getting potentially under fire, they will have a source of water right there to do it, and they've indicated they'll do that, okay? Now, my guess is a well like that, I know we were paying typically, I think, about 35 to I think maybe 50 to put them in. It kind of depends on the location you pick. Ideally has to be close enough to a 3-phase drop on an Edison or consumer line to be able to run the large pumps that are in there. So I'm guessing on that site, since there's nothing on it, I could see it easily being 60, 70 grand to put it in, because they're gonna have to run a line back to put it in.
What would it mean for us who live there with our water tables? Because I read where they dropped one of these in a residential area in Ohio, and it literally has destroyed residents' wells, and people are are like, I had to pay $10,000 for this, and I had to pay $10,000 for that. So what will that do to our,
To put the hydrant there, you mean?
yeah, to dig out additional?
Oh, I can tell you, this question came up when we were getting ready to get our ISO rating lowered here. We were supposed to put, one of the wells was supposed to be on a subdivision going in just north of my house about a mile, right? And then the builder decided not to do it. So I asked my neighbor, who was on the corner of Joslyn and Groveland, can we put the well there because it's easier for the trucks to get in and out of it? And the neighbor at the time said, well, it's not gonna make my well go dry, is it? I said, never mind, we'll put it on my house. So some people think I put it there because they get a special insurance rate. I don't get any different insurance rate than anybody else. But that industrial well is on my property in the front of my driveway, because I said I keep my driveway clean in the winter. So I will make sure you can get to the hydrant. And that well is there, it's never affected my water at all. The fire department comes by, I don't know, is it probably 2 or 3 times a year you do it?
Test on the wells at least twice a year.
Yeah, twice a year. They come by and they turn them on a while, just to make sure the pump isn't seized up and they're working. So, yeah, so there's one at my house, and I'm not at all worried about it running my well dry.
What happens though, if you're saying it takes 7 minutes to fill up these giant kiddie pools or whatever?
Mhm.
Let's say.
Three
it-
minutes,
It
actually.
catches on fire, and they have to keep filling these kiddie pools, so they're draining and sucking water from the ground.
They'll have to run the well
If that's attached
longer.
to our wells and our water table, well, that would affect our wells, right?
Well, I don't know if that could happen. It depends on how big the pockets are, and generally when you're running one of those industrial wells, they're in a huge pocket or you can't get them to pump that much water anyway. So, and it's not something they do all the time. Even when they do mine, they don't check it every
And
week.
it'll be contained, that it's only pulling water for the use on that property. It won't be a site where other like trucks and things come in and fill their tankers at that site for use otherwise.
Well,
This
single
will-
use,
It'll be single use for
Well,
that site
it's-
only.
Yeah.
Sir, I appreciate the question. I
Yeah, I
would
do
invite
too.
you to answer that,
Okay.
but let me just reassure everyone here tonight. There is a portion of tonight's agenda that is carved out for public comment, for questions, for answers. The goal of the hearing here tonight is for the commission to, pardon?
No hearing, it's just a discussion.
Just a discussion, okay. For the commission to get questions answered to the extent they're available in the room. But we do want to maintain some semblance, and we honestly don't want to be here all night. So we're going to try to have a guided discussion with questions. Danielle, is that okay?
Yes,
According to the
public
agenda,
comment
that
should be at the end.
We just do the questions and answers at the end. If you would all just bear with us and be patient.
So hold this to the end or just finish this one here?
Yeah, no,
Just for the site.
Okay, I tell you, the way the rest of the hydrants around the whole township are, the fire department knows where they are, they're all located on a map, and that's where they go depending on it's the closest one to the fire they're dealing with, okay? So I don't wanna tell you it'd never be used for anything. I mean, they've pulled up to my house and run the tanks on that, putting a neighbor's fire out that was about 4 or 5 houses down. They do that because it's not something they do every day, but they would pull it, I would think, from whatever was the closest one to it.
So Bob, if you would then return to the list of
This- okay,
elements.
sure.
But I'm gonna intervene because the tee-up is turning into a 20-minute session. So can we summarize briefly this sheet without getting into a lot of the detail like we have been?
We're almost
Because
done.
we still got
Two
a
more
whole
lines.
document that we've gotta review,
Okay.
plus we've gotta get through public comment. So let's go through this.
Well, we've covered most of
Can I
it,
ask a
really.
question? Aren't you public servants? We're the
No,
public,
I-
so I don't like being told let's cut this
No,
short.
no, I'm just saying, the meat of it, that he's summarizing, the meat of it is in this document. I'm trying to help you so we have time to get to your questions.
I
We
just-
need to get
I
through
know what
this.
cut short means sometimes in
No,
certain
I don't mean
situations,
you
so-
guys, but I'm just meaning, let's keep this short. Let's go through everything else, that way we can get to your questions quickly. And we have time allotted to be able to answer those questions, that's all I'm trying to do here, okay?
Well, I can cover the rest of this quickly for you anyway. Basically, the other things we did was, they normally train the local fire department every year and make sure they're up to date on what they have to do based on the NFP code for those types of units. And what I did is I said I want 3 fire departments because it's on the border between Springfield and Groveland, and that piece of Groveland's actually covered for us initially by North Oakland Fire Authority, which is Holly. They've agreed, all 3 fire departments, every year, they'll keep them trained. And other than that, I think the rest of it's fairly straightforward. The chief wanted the 911 call when their system creates an alarm condition, to call 911, because that's how we get dispatched. So all of those things that we talked about as possible issues, I think we will be able to get everything on this list for that, okay? Now, the other issue that's come up, just so you know, is everybody I've talked to has said, these sites pretty much go in. But you asked some of you asked the questions, I think you did to me this morning, and so have several of the members. How did we determine this site? How does it get done? I don't remember, and I've read a volume of stuff on this, about a list of things they did, but I do remember the discussion that said when you can use it, you can use a brownfield, which is actually an advantage to the company, Vesper, if they can find one, because they get some kind of a tax credit, I think, for 15 years from that. But they end up going in, and I asked Vesper, you're going to get questions on the 30th when you come back from my planning commission and from the residents. They want to know how the site gets picked. Why is it this site? Because there's, I'm sure, a number of them they looked at. And the end result is they said, that's no problem. We got a whole list of things that we look at when we're going for a site. And so I'll be prepared to talk to it and give you bullet points on it, on how we pick the sites and how they get done. I had a lunch with the supervisors again last Monday and asked if anybody else had heard anything. As I said, I seem to be the lucky guy that got the first one, okay? And we had a lobbyist guest speaker, the same guy that I see when I go up to testify to try and keep control over the sand and gravel mines, and so he knew me. When we got done, I said, can you tell me, is there anything new on this? And he said, I can tell you what we tell everybody we talk to. If you have someone making an application, you want to try and negotiate what you can before the law goes into effect. It's just a simple, I have no options after that, really. So that's the update on this. The ordinance you have was garnered from talking to Melanie Kroll, the gal from MSU, and to Vesper, and then looking at the ordinances in the state, and we tried to, wherever possible, parody the same language they use for things like the decommissioning, and that is exactly the same as what we got out of the state language. The differences are these areas that we're trying to do here. So that's the summary I would give you.
So the state language that you referred to, Bob, is drawn from?
The state ordinance. And it's on parts of it. For example, where it's this, when we got to the part, how do you decommission these after years, and how do you clean up the site? All of that language, we pulled it right out of the ordinance, and I told Vesper, I'm just taking whatever the state tells you gotta do and using the same thing.
And for the most part, that has been done, just looking at it, looking at actual, the state draft application instructions and procedures that they have to go through and file. So for the most part, they followed that, which is good, and it aligns outside of what is being said in terms of the setbacks and that, which are much more conservative on our end versus what the state is requiring. But there are a few things that the state's requiring in terms of their process and procedures for application to go through and file the state that I think we're missing on the ordinance. That's where when we start leaving, when we get into that discussion, I wanna at least bring these points up to see if they were considered, or if we want to consider them as an addition to, in terms of some of the areas that going through their draft, I'm not seeing in the draft ordinance. So for the state, so right now, and it's open for comment until July 17th, where
That'd be
they
tomorrow.
got the application, instructions and procedures, right? For all this. So basically, when you go through and you read it, they go through and they point to what's in the state,
Sure.
what is it, PA? I can't
233.
Yeah, 233. And they pulled it into a nice document for the applicant, which if it was Vesper, they wanted to just go straight to the state tomorrow, they would follow this application process. They do a really nice job detailing it out. So what I was doing is reviewing what they had versus what was drafted from a township standpoint. And for the most part, it's quite aligned in certain areas from the township standpoint, like Bob indicated. We're more conservative on a few areas, especially along the lines of setback, which is good. And giving a little bit more detail where there's missing detail in the application process. However, there are some areas where the state actually does, believe it or not, a really good job to ensure that the land use has been properly vetted. So, for example, on the state process, they indicate that there needs to be documentation that serves as justification if the facility plans to be placed on undeveloped land. So case in point, in the woods, it's undeveloped land. So there has to be strong justification on why that area versus other areas in the community, like, for example, brownfield areas or vacant industrial lots, etc. According to the state, it's actually preferred that these type of projects be placed on those type of sites, and those type of sites be considered first and foremost before going on undeveloped land. So that's one area that I don't see in the ordinance anywhere is that vetting process, which.
But that's part of what they're gonna talk about, when they come on the 30th. They said they'd be happy to go
But
through the
I'm
points on
getting
it.
back to, and I know Vesper's separate,
Okay,
but I'm getting back to the actual ordinance that the
Okay.
township's trying to put together. and putting
That's what I'm
something
thinking
in there.
about.
So that was one thing that I flagged out right away, that maybe that merits more discussion for us to entertain, if we're gonna have such an ordinance. This I thought was really, one of the few things the state actually did a really good job on when they.
Is there a number for that ordinance?
It's actually, and Danielle sent the link, and maybe we can make that public where, and it's not an ordinance per se, it's an actual set of instructions that they are working on approving right now, and it's probably gonna be tucked up underneath 233 is what I'm thinking, but they're actually vetting that out right now. It's open for comment until tomorrow, unfortunately. And I was
Is
just
that
going through it
Madeline's
today.
document? Is that the document Madeline's writing?
Madeline's writing the
No.
guides, and she's
The
with
guide.
the, with the
This
team
is
of people.
different
This is,
from that guy.
this is directly from the state. So this is the link that, and I'm talking to, this is the link that Danielle had sent, what was that, yesterday or a couple of days, it was a few days ago.
Yeah, I had sent it a while back, but I don't think a lot of people
And
got it,
she
so.
resent it. But basically what it is, it is actually called Draft Application Instructions and Procedures for Renewable Energy and Storage Facilities, and it's by the state. And it's basically what the applicant needs to do, what they need to provide, in order for them to be considered, at the state level in terms of getting their approval. And it's pretty comprehensive. I was actually shocked at how comprehensive it was. But that's one thing that really caught my eye in terms of a part of the process. The other part of the process was, they also want to make sure that there is a clear understanding of the adjacent properties. So the adjacent properties around, the site area, understanding basically what are those properties? Are they tied to farmland? Are they tied to having that vet out as well? Because reading through the spirit of the document when it comes to land use and adjacent properties, it sounds like they're very sensitive to agriculture, as well as residential. So they want to understand that up front when they're making a decision. So again, something to think about in terms of the ordinance. I don't think it was, I didn't really see anything in our ordinance to at least vet that out, to do the due diligence.
I wonder if you go all the way to the last page,
Did I miss it?
section T, I mean, right at the very end, there is a section for site selection. I wonder if that would be the appropriate place to put something like that.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Just a
So
separate little
again,
section, just even maybe cut and paste that boilerplate and put that in.
Yeah, something to think about there.
Just so you know, that's part of what the call is supposed to be with Madeline Kroll. Are these checklist items supposed to be in here too? And we included kind of a generic phrase to say whatever other application requirements there are from the state. So we're fully aware we don't have everything buttoned down in here yet, but that's the intent.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I would say where we can, because you don't want something that's more lenient, right,
Yeah,
than
no,
the state.
no.
You wanna be at least on par, or in some, with some areas that may be a bit more conservative, but not, I think what the issue is, not being so far left, so out in left field, where basically you're at the mercy where the company just goes and says, screw you, I'm going to the state and putting in. So, that's kind of the balance here in terms of the ordinance. Just two more things and I'll be done. The other thing too that the state has in their application process is they request an explanation describing the impacts and effects of the proposed facility on public health and safety. So again, they're going through and they're just ensuring that the company is doing due diligence on really understanding and describing what not just the day-to-day impacts are, but the potential impacts, and vetting that out too. And I think that's really good to have as well, in there. And then the last thing is identifying parcels within the project boundaries, and I know this doesn't apply to Vesper, but this is something that could apply if someone else comes along. But identifying parcels within the project boundaries, participating in the farmland developmental rights agreements under PA 116, which is basically your right to farmland. Just making sure, once again, and again, Vesper's different in terms of their site that was chosen, although it's considered undeveloped, so that's something that we gotta discuss. But right now, from what we know, the property that's in that, I don't think is anything that's tied to right to farm or anything of that nature, but if someone else came along, we would need to vet that out, and I think that really should be in there as well.
To that issue though, when we started this, and Vesper asked about this, I said I have no intention of trying to write a new ordinance that will cover all the wind, all the solar, and all the different types of batteries. If this is going to be done, it's going to be tailored to take care of this one site, because I don't want to open a Pandora's box all the way across the township. And if you recall, Madeline said basically these ordinances are kind of one-off. So we may have to add some language there, but the intent is not to have 50 other people come in under this and do it. You can't do it that way, because on each of these, they actually have to be, if you recall, they have to be agreed to by the participant that wants to do it. And that's why she said at any point in time, if you put requirements in here and they don't think they can do them, they'll simply divert and go back to the state. And then you're stuck with the state's rules. So this was never intended to be something that would be used unilaterally across the township. It was meant to see if it can take care of this one site, that's it, which is part of the reason we want to put a 50-acre minimum on it, because I don't want a bunch of 10 or 15-acre parcels showing up with the same thing. I can't remember exactly where I saw it, because I've read so much on this stuff now, but one of the documents I looked at said they were only looking at about 80,000 square feet for one of these to be located, which is less than 2.5 acres. That would make it available on just about every piece of property in the township.
So, and thanks, I forgot about that this was special, this falls under the special land use, but, So that would probably negate that previous comment, but that's still going back over to point one, the fact that they're on undeveloped land. They gotta do their,
It's a fair
to me,
question.
they need to, it needs to be captured, they need to do their due diligence and justify to us why that site is needed and it cannot be done.
And I did express that to him today, and she said, that's no problem, I'll go back to the people. We've got a litany of things that we look at when we're picking a site, we'll cover it with you.
How big will you let them grow that site though?
Well, actually, it's limited to the initial application, because when they asked, that's a good question. When they asked originally, they said, we wanna make it, it's 300 megawatts, but you know, it might be eventually 600, and I said, well, here's how it works when we do commercial site plans. You want 300 megawatts and you submit 300 megawatts, that's what you get. You want 600 megawatts, you submit 600 megawatts, and we'll look at that. But if you make it 300 and you decide you wanna add later, that's a brand new site plan, come back in, you get re-reviewed, and I said, that's the way we do anybody's commercial site plan, and I can't do it any different for you than anyone else. And they came back and said, yeah, we're not going over 300 megawatts. So, good question though, but we did cover that with them early on.
So Angela, you had some remaining points.
Those were my hitters, because what I was trying to do is compare, quite frankly, I think a nice job was done on this.
Special thanks to Danielle.
Yeah,
And Laura.
I think it was excellent because it aligns quite nicely with what the state has. And again, like I said, with some effort to be conservative on such things as setbacks, things of that nature. I think the only thing too, I would just flag out that I'm not sure if I saw it on here, was getting into the hazard mitigation analysis and plan. The state flags that out, and I wasn't sure if that's really, it's flagged out as it just says on ours, it just says hazard mitigation analysis with not a whole lot after it, where I think in the state application process, there's a little bit more information.
And that's part of the reason why we don't wanna change any of that stuff from what the state's asking. So I know there's a piece of language we had added at the end of the day on our call that said, and includes any other permits required by the state. So typically on hazard mitigation, what happens is, for example, something happens, the fire department goes out, if they think there's a contamination, they end up calling Eagle. And then Eagle gets like white on right.
Of the properties within 1,000 feet of the property, with the question on those properties, sign the farmland, let them come back with the answer, let them do the legwork. Those were and then the last but not least, but an explanation describing the effects and impacts of the proposed facility on public health and safety. So then that way, we know they're doing their due diligence in exploring that and understanding that. So I would say those three areas I'd like to see in there in some way, shape, or form in the ordinance.
Those being site selection or location,
Yeah,
hazard mitigation, and what was the third? Generally,
yeah, site location, I think the 2 points
Public
I
health
made are
impact,
under
you
site
said.
location.
When's the third one, public health impact?
Right, yeah. So that's not necessarily hazard mitigation analysis, that's just understanding the
Yes, it was.
overall effects and impact.
Let me make sure I got them all, so I can remember to make sure I get answers to these ones. Documentation on the undeveloped land use issue,
Yes,
adjacent property impacts,
yes,
impacts on public health,
that's it.
identify the parcels and the EPA references or as amended in there.
Yeah, you can put that in there, but we know
Yeah.
that doesn't apply to them. And being
Well, yeah, but I mean, it
it's
doesn't hurt to have it added in there, I think,
Okay.
so I'm fine with asking for, actually, I'm, again, I don't know, that, if I had to guess, that might be determined by that organization that all of the providers are part of as to how you connect to the line. If I had to guess, they probably want as short a distance from that switching unit to the ITC line that they're tied into. There's a company that comes in and does that for them, I believe. I don't think
We
they
should
do it
probably at
themselves.
least have some kind of language in here to make sure that everything is defined on the layout, including any ancillary buildings.
That's what I was thinking.
With measurements in terms of what the setback is from the road or adjacent properties, things of that
Yeah,
nature.
I think that, when I get it, I think that'll be easy to get it. It
Yeah.
should be all laid out on there. I just don't know if
Because the
the last
reason
one I
why-
have is accurate or not.
So I'm asking because there is in the draft ordinance for this, it's got, and I know it's different, but they got occupied community buildings a setback 800 feet from nearest point on the outer wall, and then they got public road right away, which is just like what you have 100 feet. And then non-participating properties, you already know that's 100 feet, so. But I'm just trying to figure out, okay, if there's other ancillary buildings on the premises, we really need to make sure.
The only drawings I've seen have been the battery units and that one switch building, but I'm sure when we get a final one, we can get those questions answered.
July 30th, Bob, you had said that's when Vesper will be on-prem to address the technical questions.
I told them, people wanted to know how the site got selected, what goes into it. She said, we got a whole list of criteria that goes into it. I'll be happy to go over those in bullet point form so you know what we use to look at it. And I'll also have Will Hostler here. That's a township attorney.
Has Will, incidentally, just this kind of a collateral observation, has Will reviewed the proposed ordinance?
We sent this one to him, and I've talked to him about the previous version that you saw where,
Mark?
you know, the first one, we had some sections in there twice,
Right.
some reference numbers were wrong. That's what we were trying to clean up, Danielle and I today on the phone. And that's why I think this one's much closer to what it would be. And we sent that to Will as well, but I've talked to him several times on this.
And just, again, I'm sorry, for my benefit, the elements you worked through earlier, these are not written in stone.
No,
These are-
this is the, I'm trying to be as transparent as I
Right.
can. This is the gist of the issues that, many of which I heard from previous meetings that we had, that I'm trying to address in there, and I feel pretty confident these are gonna be done. I sent that draft that you got to Jessica today at about 4 o'clock, and I said, you need to look at it. I think she got this with it too, didn't she, Danielle? Yeah, I said, you need to look at it and tell me if you got any problems.
My question is, have these elements been written into the proposed ordinance? I see hints that some of them have, but
Not all of them,
not
Yeah.
all.
not all of them.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if we got the 50 acres in this draft or not, but I've told, they won't be, they're not gonna balk at that, because I told them at the beginning, I don't wanna open up Pandora's box.
But the setbacks.
The setbacks,
They're in there.
the, yeah.
The DB is, the well is, I saw that.
The main
Not sure
stuff.
about the fence.
Yeah, they agreed to the fence, I know they will.
Just the details, the fire hydrant well on page 3, section L, it just lists 350 to 500 gallons, it needs to be gallons per minute.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Just so we have the correct flow.
Yeah, we don't want,
I
well,
guess it's
4
just-
weeks later, you get 300 gallons,
Just a
right?
detail.
Okay.
Good point.
GPM, I guess we need to put after it, right?
Yep.
So Bill, anyone, Jim?
Yeah, regarding the water wells, and Stacy, maybe you can help me out. Are these water wells electrically powered, or are they still, are they?
All of them have a power source.
Then my recommendation would be, because I don't know what type of fire could break out and the heat generated, that I'd like to see if there's any possibility that power can be compromised. Then we have some type of standby system far enough away to energize it, if it's practical.
Well, I can tell you that all of the ones we have in the township are typically running off of a 3-phase drop from a pole. The one that's by my house has to be from that pole that's in the corner between mine and my neighbor's property, because it has, for lack of a better phrase, the right electricity. All the sirens out here have to be by a pole that has the right kind of electricity for it. So it's not something you could just do it, but we keep that generator in, we get installed on it or something, we pull around for lights and stuff. I don't know if that's even 3-phase. The one that we use for accidents on I-75, all the lights and stuff.
All the portable like trailers.
Yeah, I don't know if that's enough. You need most of these have to have a three-phase well, because they're huge pumps. And so, I don't know that you can easily get even a portable one to do it, but what I did tell them, they asked, where do you want the well? And I said, when you give me the site plan, I'll have the fire chief look at it and check it. But my inclination is put it on the edge of the road at the clearing where a fire truck can get at it easily, but it's far enough away that if the boxes are on fire, it's not exposing the fire personnel to a danger. So I really don't think that's likely we would have it, because I'd be willing to guarantee you on 62 acres, they're gonna have to put at least 3 or 4 poles to get the power to the pump. Line poles to extend the power.
Can we dictate if it's underground?
I don't know. I can ask.
I like it.
I'll ask.
The other thing that I have, to the board and to Bob, if there's any latitude to accelerate the, I don't know, the word would be saturation of the bond from 10 years to 5 years, I'd be all for that.
You know, we could, but I'll be honest, I don't think those are gonna be issues with them. And you need to remember, I'm kind of negotiating her with one hand firmly tied behind my back. If we don't have a little bit of leeway, and to me, that seemed like the least worrisome issue.
That's aligned with also, by the way, the application process for the state. She basically took the exact language from the state and
Yes.
inserted it right in there.
So, I'm just suggesting, my whole take on this is, it's much easier to get concessions if you're addressing somebody in a proactive, positive way than just digging your hands in and saying no, because then they're just gonna say, great, we'll go to the state, you'll get 55 dB and 300 feet, have a good day, right? So, I think we've got the gist of all of the important issues, and they've been, so far, not done, but so far, very flexible and accommodating.
So the one thing I had a question on, and it's not related to the ordinance, but to Vesper. So I was doing some research on these type of projects where they're an independent company and they're basically using the grid to charge up these batteries, so they're paying for electricity to charge these batteries.
At off-peak hours,
And
yeah.
then when, let's say DTE is in a bind, then they buy back electricity from these companies. What I did find out in my reading, the controversy around that is how, there is a concern from a locality standpoint of utility prices going up for the consumers that are in the area, the residents. Hear me out. But that does go into and I know it's not health and safety, but to me, I think that impact needs to be very transparent to the community. And on top of that, if there is, because that was the other thing that was in the state application process, was that the company had to do their due diligence to ensure that there are local host agreements in place.
They're talking about the agreement with the municipality.
Right, and what that means is monetary compensation or giving back to the community in some way, shape, or form. But where I'm going on this is, if Vesper, and maybe it's DTE, if we could find out what that impact is, so even though it's not health and safety, it's an impact to the residents, find out what that impact is and request some kind of monetary compensation that would go directly back to the residents.
I don't know how you could possibly do that, because if you remember at the beginning, they said that group that does these interconnections for everybody, think of it like one giant fire hose is the electric system, and all of these different feeds, the power plants, the storage batteries, all that stuff feed into it, and then the people that need the electricity anywhere along there pull it out based on what their need is. So I don't know that you could even remotely check
But
if there would be any impact at all.
I thought how this is set up, it's actually tied to a certain grid, so it's actually limited. It's not broad where.
Well, but that grid
everybody
feeds a
stays.
lot of different places.
I get that, but I still think the question needs to be posed on how we can mitigate that, or how we can at least see if that can be addressed. I don't think we got the right people in the room to really vet that out and see.
I
still-
can ask them, but I don't think they're gonna have it.
Well, I think we need to keep bugging, because that's something that is a controversy with these type of facilities. It's one thing if it's DTE that's putting it in, like they're putting it in Trenton, I think it's Trenton.
Yeah.
But that's a DTE facility, so that's a bit different, where you don't have this buying and selling going on between two entities. The fact that you've got, you can get it coming and going. Unfortunately, you can get it because the demand for electricity to charge their batteries is now gonna go up, which, you know, what happens with supply and demand, prices go up on that way. But then also too, you may get it on the back end when things get tight and they gotta actually start tapping into that company. Now they're gonna get sold back
At a
electricity
premium.
at a premium.
Yes.
So then now you're caught coming and going. There's gotta be something that could be.
Well, I see what you're saying, but I don't think that's exactly how it works. They're buying it off peak because the providers that generate the electricity have extra capacity off peak that they can make electricity on, that they don't because they can't sell it, nobody's using it right then. The benefit of having the storage systems in there is that when you do have high demand, like air conditioning, and they can't make enough power for it, these can be put back in and you will buy it at premium. But I think it's, everybody does it. If you look at how the Public Service Commission does most things, and I have a long background from telephone industry, they do things to try and figure out how do we amortize this stuff fairly to everybody. I can't even remotely imagine how you could try and say, can we somehow tie that to the people in Groveland that we think might be paying more because they're buying it? It just doesn't work that way. But I'll ask them, but I'm gonna tell you, I don't think there's a snowball's chance of getting that.
No, when the power goes out, they tell me we're on one of the smallest grids.
Yep.
That's why we're the last ones get turned on.
You're right.
It's like, all right, can we
So
have
just the
these-
grid that powers Groveland, doesn't have to be the whole.
But you know, if they did that way, we would have somebody that has a big plant like in St. Clair say, well, we hosted St. Clair, so we get our electricity for 2 cents an hour. You could tell Groveland theirs is 95 cents an hour. They don't do it that way. They amortize everything over the whole system. I'll ask them, but I'm just telling you, they're not gonna have an answer for that one.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, it's like, is there something that we can get on from the resident standpoint?
There's just no way to do that, but I understand what you're asking.
Jim, did you have other?
I'm done, thanks. Yeah.
Neil?
Just going back to noise level, I'm not trying to beat this one to death, just trying to keep it simple, right? It sounds like we've got them aiming towards 45 dBA at the property line.
Trying, yes.
Trying. Could we make that the standard? Because right now, the way you read this, it's very complicated. 'Cause it says, best not to exceed noise level of 44 dBA or average hourly decibels as modeled at the nearest outer wall of the nearest dwelling located on an adjacent
Yeah,
non-participating
because
property.
I took the language
Right.
straight out of the ordinance, the way it is, where it says 55.
Yeah, and that's
But
what the
if-
ordinance
if-
said.
And that's all I've talked about. If we
Yeah.
get them to agree to 45 at the DB, at the property line, I think we would change that
I'm
word.
only clean that up,
Yeah.
and then it goes on to say the sound limits apply to the contribution from the best only and do not include contributions from background ambient
Yeah,
sounds.
that's because
I'm
if you were
assuming
close
it's
to the freeway, you
highway
get
and
70 from the
whatnot.
highway.
Again, if we can just streamline this.
If they'll, and again, I think, in fairness to
Just say
Jessica.
propose it that way.
Yeah, well, that's why I was asking for,
Right.
based on your request, if we
Right.
could do it at the property line, but that's when I'm telling you, Frank, she has to go back to the engineer that designs this and ask him, is that workable? My gut feeling is, because of the heavy woods on the property and the matting on the screens,
It's
I
gonna
think
be,
we can.
it should, yeah. So I'm hoping to replace that whole paragraph with
Yeah.
just one simple line.
45 at the property line, yeah,
Right.
that would be the
Thank you.
desired result, yeah.
Any other questions?
The special use permit application,
Mhm.
that is only going to be used for this one time only for us.
It's
That's all
gonna be
it's designed for.
specific to just the,
Can you put that in the heading so that it doesn't ever get used for anything else?
yeah, it will. It'll be best specific.
Okay.
So, yeah, that was what I was gonna ask too, because right now it's set up the please respond to the and you've got your checklist, are you gonna modify that checklist? Does it mean?
I have, it's all, actually all crossed out. That
Is it?
won't, yeah, that
Okay.
checklist won't be there. It'll be
Okay.
completely different.
Perfect.
But if you guys want something on there,
I'll have to see where we put it, because the design intent is to make it so it doesn't fit everybody. That's why I want to put the 50 acres and stuff in there. I don't want 15 of these coming in saying, I'm on 80,000 square feet and I want one.
We probably do want some stuff in there, and, you know, just making sure we're ticking the boxes, like,
it'll just be a checks box
Yeah.
as to are they applying by this, or did the
right.
setbacks, all that stuff. Have you done this?
Do
Have you done that?
do you have your layout, you know, your?
Yeah, because this one is just very much festival specific.
Right.
So, yeah,
Okay, okay, thank you.
yep.
Okay, from my view, and maybe, you know, my fellow commissioners could help me see what I might not be seeing. There's a lot of foresight, obviously, you would hope, you would expect at the application and the approval stages, and the ordinance speaks to that. But one of the concerns that we kind of escalated to Will was our ability to regulate and to monitor and to, you know, ensure compliance over time. And I see very little in the ordinance that speaks to that capability. Now, is that something that just statutorily or from the eyes of governance is frowned upon?
I don't know that it's frowned upon, it's what do we have the actual testing for? We send our fire inspector out to every commercial site every year to make sure they look like they're in compliance with stuff, and when
Is
they
there a right
have.
of entry?
Pardon me?
Is there a right of entry by township officials anytime to access this?
Fire inspector, I can go into any commercial business. If there's a complaint, I go into every commercial business in the township at least once a year to do an annual fire inspection, and then if anybody calls and has a complaint, I can go back and meet with them.
And then if there is found to be something that's unacceptable or maybe an arguable violation, in your estimation, what's the remedy in the confines of the ordinance for that, you know, that infraction?
So like a fire code violation,
Correct.
I give them usually a 2-week time frame to rectify that situation. And I haven't had anybody yet that hasn't taken care of that. If they don't, at that point, you can warn them again, explain to them it needs to be fixed, show them the code, this is why it needs to be done, and if you have to, you can escalate it up to a ticket and take it to the court and go in front of a judge.
I guess my question, or what I'm thinking, would there be any basis to warrant some provision within the ordinance that kind of escalates and accelerates our ability to rectify those types of issues?
Like a violation,
Correct.
money, that's all done under the enforcement.
Is
And
there
basically our-
enforcement right in
Listen, I
the-
can
All our-
tell you, she's pretty good at going to a gas station and said, you know, your safety switches don't work, close the pumps right now. Because I've had 2 or 3 that she's done it to. And that's very good at getting people to comply, because they can't sell gas when the pump don't work. So, I mean, she has that kind of authority if she has to, but you know, these are sophisticated machines that have very elaborate, I'm sure, troubleshooting process. What our concern was, if that troubleshooting condition tells their people that are remotely monitoring it, you have a condition that's reaching an alarm status, that we also had to dial 911, because that's how our fire departments get their calls to go on respond. And she basically said, because the guy first told him, we'll be there, you know, within a half hour. And Kevin said, that's great, I'll be there long before you get there.
So just with regard to the decibel requirement.
There was
minimum,
language on how we have to check that, yeah.
But what is the cure for a violation of the ordinance?
Well, we would have to go, we have a DB meter, a good one, that we use when we got the ORV part, you know. And so we would have the ordinance officer go out with the DB meter and try and validate it, just like we do if somebody says, I'm getting noise from the ORV park, they go out with the DB meter and check it and see is that actually in violation or not.
Okay, it'd be the same approach,
Yeah.
the same standard.
Sure.
The one thing, because I just remembered something when you brought that up. The one thing that I would also like to see, and again, it's getting back to being aligned with the state, with their document, is getting a little bit more detailed with the emergency response plan. The state does a really good job detailing out what should be in there. And I just would emphasize that, especially because they're very big on contingency plans in this
But-
application process, and I would just make sure that that's.
They've
right
actually
down.
hired a bunch of fire personnel to do their own training. They come out and train the fire department, so Kevin's familiar with the 855 MPA code. I'm sure they will have that documented to the wazoo like we do on everything else. That will be covered, and they will have to upgrade it every year to make sure that personnel change.
I get
New
it, but we
people.
need to have it in writing in the
Oh,
ordinance.
yeah, I mean, but they're just not supplying it yet. 'Cause we don't
Yeah,
have it.
so I just would recommend going through and putting, again, taking another look at what the state has in terms of their application and procedures document, and taking a little bit more verbatim and plugging it in there to give a little bit more meat behind that, PRP.
So Ange, just, so I'm understanding what you're getting at, the emergency operation plan, that is part of the permitting approval
Approval,
process, correct? And that is codified in the ordinance,
Yeah,
right?
all of those other permits, like I said, air quality from the
This is
EPA.
emergency response plan.
But they still gotta
But you
provide
have to
all that
provide
before they
that
get their
at the
permit.
time of permitting, according to the ordinance.
What typically happens on your site plans, if you're not aware of it, they get approved, and then they have a list of different things they have to do, like the soil erosion and all that other, this MPA stuff here. They actually don't get to start until they provide all of that documentation. Danielle does that with site plans all the time.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess just generally, other than Will, has Madeline Kroll been asked to review the?
I have sent her everything, and the last time I talked to her was about 2 days ago, and she sent me a text in the morning and said, I'm gonna be gone till the 22nd. I'll be back on the 22nd or 3rd, and I'll talk to you then, and I can make your meeting on the 30th. It'll probably be via, Zoom again.
And just because Groveland is kind of at the forefront of the technology,
As we like to say, the bleeding edge, right?
are there other ordinances in effect that have been approved by local governments